Today's episode is brought to you by the Local Palate Cookbook Club.
What is the most iconic Italian cookbook ever written? Today, we're going to find out. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I'm Kate Leahy, and today I'm here with Kristin Donnelly. Hey, Kristin.
Hey, Kate.
I looked this up because I wasn't sure, but it relates to the book we're going to talk about today. It's the definition of a talisman, which is an object deemed to have magical properties. It's supposed to make someone feel calm and happy, and it's a carrier of good luck. So I'm just curious, before we get into the book, Kristin, do you have any talismans in your life?
I don't, but now I want one.
Me too. I know. Maybe it'll just be this copy of this book. We're going to be talking about an Italian cookbook. It translates in English to The Talisman of Happiness. I mean, what a title.
I know. It's so whimsical. I don't know. I guess especially as people who love food and we love recipes, I love the idea of a cookbook being, something that's magical that brings me happiness.
Right. Il talismano. That is something really nice to that. Maybe I need like a nice wooden bowl to go along with my cookbook. So like that bowl, every time I make a salad in there, it's like a talisman of happiness bowl salad. So this is a type of episode I don't think we've done before. It's really an origin story of a historic cookbook that's being re-released and translated into English. It's different in many ways. One is that instead of talking to the author who passed away in the 1970s, we're talking to the editors who are bringing this book to a new audience today in 2025. It's kind of a crazy and fun story.
Yeah, and it's a book that I guess if you're deep into Italian food, you might know. And in Italy, they certainly know the book, but in the US, it's not well known at all. But it sounds a bit like Our Joy of Cooking.
Right.
Where it's just jam-packed with all kinds of recipes, often very short, and something that's given frequently as a gift,
right?
Especially like when people get married. It's incredible to have something that has that kind of cultural importance.
Right. And we've talked a lot on this podcast about Italian cookbooks. This book feels like it's the mother tree of a lot of Italian cookbook writing careers. This was a book beloved by Marcella Hassan, Lydia Bastianich, and so many more people who are really well known in America for teaching us how to cook in an Italian way. But it was not easy to get this book published in America. The people who were able to do this, one, it's Michael Szczerban. He first heard about this book in 2013. He told me that this was like his white whale. This was the book he kept trying to chase, trying to figure out ways to publish it. It was hard to track down the right people. He was an editor at Simon & Schuster when he first heard about the book. Later, he left and went to Little Brown. And then in 2019, he launched within Little Brown an imprint called Voracious, which does a lot of really fantastic cookbooks. So we're going to learn a little bit about Voracious in this conversation. And we're also going to hear from Raquel Pelzel, who was an editor at Clarkson Potter for many years. Before that, she was a cookbook author. She is now the editorial director at Voracious. We've done workshops with her with the podcast. So we're going to hear from these two very experienced editors about how they brought this book to market. Let's bring them on. Michael and Raquel, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Thank you for having us.
We're looking forward to this conversation because I don't think we've done a conversation like this on our podcast. We've done like origin stories of books, but this is a very different type of origin story.
Right, a book that starts with an editor.
This is like a hero's journey kind of story. So let's get into it. So Michael, you first came to hear of this book years ago. Take us back to when you first heard about this book.
Well, it was 12 years ago. I was a young editor at Simon & Schuster. I was working with Samin Nosrat on her book Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. I want to say this was the autumn of 2013. We had acquired her book in the springtime. We were just having these regular conversations just about all kinds of things. I mean, about the book, but we circled pretty far away from the book. My recollection is that we were talking about pesto, and Samin was explaining how much more seductive a pesto can be, like a basil pesto, if you make it in a mortar with a pestle instead of using a food processor. The texture is so different. It's beguiling instead of straightforward. Then we started talking about travels to Italy and her own time training with people there and the home cooks that she had worked with. And somewhere along the conversation, she mentioned this woman named Ada Boni and her book that was in Italian called Il Talismano della Felicità, that translates to The Talisman of Happiness. I just thought, like, what a name for a book.
Yeah.
Like, what a weird name, but also what a beautiful and evocative name for, all of the gifts that a recipe can give you. I just kind of tucked that away. She had said something like, everybody in Italy, every chef in Italy knows this book, but strangely, it's like not really well known here in the United States. And we continued on and, we're working on her book and so on. But at that time, when I was just trying to make a name for myself as an editor, I had a practice every week of trying to write an email to somebody new or let somebody know that I thought that a piece of writing they had done or a recipe they had done, or, to reach out to somebody I had started to follow on social media, just to try to develop my own list as an editor. So for a long time, I was just scratching more underneath the surface of who Ada Boni was and what the Talisman of Happiness was. At that time, there wasn't even a Wikipedia page for Ada, at least not in English. The machine translation engines were not really as available, so it's not like I was going to the Italian Wikipedia or Googling for things in that language. But I just kept searching in, old newspaper archives, and eventually I began to understand that actually this woman, Ada, was I came to believe one of the most groundbreaking, pioneering women in food history. And without her work to make this book, The Talisman of Happiness, we might not all be, dreaming about carbonara.
Wow.
Italian food might not have ever become known to the world in the way that it is known and so beloved. I guess I started to feel like, I somehow had been entrusted with this matching of capacity as a book editor with the knowledge that this book was out there. To me, the greatest gift of being an editor and now publisher is that when you see that the world needs to have a book, you don't have to be the first person to write it. You can find somebody to do it, but you actually can help bring that book into the world. And I just thought there's so many valences of this story that are interesting, that she was, this early feminist, that she was telling the story of Italian food to Italians because she had started to do this book. I should say this book is about 100 years old, and Ada has been dead for 42 years or something like that.
Yeah, which is another twist to the story. I mean, she died in the 1970s.
Yes.
When she was writing about Italian food, this is probably when their highways are being built, like the modernization post-World War II. I mean, it was before World War II and after that this book kind of continued on, right?
Yes.
Totally changing Italy.
Yes. I should say, I can wax on about Ada in this book, so just cut me off.
So let me back up. So you're like, this woman is fascinating. This book is really fascinating. I want to publish it. So you're still at Simon & Schuster at this point?
Yes.
And then what happens?
I was trying to figure out if somebody had published it. I did come across, and just some details. So Ada was born in the 1880s. She was born in Rome. I think her uncle had been a chef. Maybe some of these details are kind of apocryphal and just what I found on the internet. And she and her husband had started a magazine devoted to the domestic arts, what I guess you would call like a women's magazine. And whether she was the first editor who was a woman to run a magazine in Italy or just one of the first, I'm not sure. But she was definitely a groundbreaking person in that sense. What she had done in this magazine was starting to collect recipes from all over Italy, which until recently had been completely fragmented groups of different states that weren't one country. So she kind of crowdsourced this sense of what Italian food was, published them in the magazine, eventually then said, hey, readers, if like 500 of you will say you're going to buy a cookbook, then I'll make a cookbook. And they did. That book was published in the late 1920s. It was The Talisman of Happiness. And since then has sold millions of copies in Italy. It has never gone out of print. It was the book that I would argue inspired The Silver Spoon, that huge Italian book from Fiden. Was also a book that apparently taught Marcella Hazan how to cook.
Oh, wow.
Just had these incredible influences. But yeah, the first edition came out in 1929, I want to say, with 880 some recipes, and then went through a number of revisions over the years where it expanded to nearly 2,000.
I guess it's a bit like joy of cooking. I don't know how much joy is like crowdsourced necessarily, but yeah, just trying to create this like unified idea of a cuisine. And number one, you mentioned every couple gets one as a gift, right?
Yes.
When they're about to get married. Yeah, I feel like joy is still sometimes that way.
And I just love that thought that like this book is the talisman of happiness in your new life
in your
together.
home.
That cooking and eating well together is the key to happiness is like totally my MO in life. So to have that wisdom from somebody like Ada was amazing.
And it's not only the gift that people get for a wedding, but it's something that was handed down too from generation to generation. Wow. So when I was reaching out for blurbs and quotes about the book that go on the end papers and on Amazon and all that stuff, I was reaching out to people and they would say like, oh my gosh, I got this copy, like Giada, this is my grandmother's copy. Or I reached out to Marcello Hazan's son, Giuliano, and he's like, yeah, I still have my mom's leather-bound copy. And it's like so close to people's hearts. And lots of chefs too, like they just, Mark Vetri was like, oh my gosh, this is like the raddest cookbook ever. Like, of course I'll give a quote. Like people were so excited and happy. It was pretty incredible.
That's so cool.
But imagine hearing that all these people who you respect and admire have gotten part of their artistry and have created the worlds that we know inspired by something that you've never heard of. I think that to me was the thing where I was like, well, God, like somebody's got to do this. And I guess it should be me because nobody else was trying to.
No one else is on the case.
Why is it that I know Silver Spoon, but until you told me about the Talisman of Happiness, I had never heard of the Talisman? Why do we know the Silver Spoon? Is it because it got translated earlier or?
It came later, actually. Again, this is apocryphal, but I read somewhere on the internet, I'm sure there are Italian scholars, and I hope that our publication inspires some greater inquiry into this. I think that there was maybe a contract dispute or the editors of The Silver Spoon were a competing magazine. I think it was called Dominus, maybe, or something like that. They had, I presume, had seen the presence of Talisman in the marketplace and wanted to do something like that on their own. But I think crucially, it was a little bit more modern. So I guess 30 years later or something was when they first started. But then they had a popularizer. I don't think that the Silver Spoon was widely known until somebody at Phaidon had come along and thought, oh, we're going to try to make this a big global to-do.
I see.
And I remember that publication. I mean, it was kind of amazing to think, oh, wow, like here's one of the real touchstones of this culture. And then to learn that there was something even before that was in a way the mother of every Italian cookbook that followed was just so tantalizing.
Absolutely.
Before we get into the undertaking of finally getting this book here, I do want to hear a bit about Voracious. What makes something a voracious book?
Should I start?
You start, Mike.
This is going to be the real test to see whether the game of telephone has worked. But to me, the theme that connects all of my publishing in cookbooks is this idea that food touches everything in the world. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, an Instant Pot recipe is just an Instant Pot recipe. But actually, I think there's a real importance to giving people who are using Instant Pots, who I think just to talk about that one publishing trend, which is now kind of fading. But for a while, Instant Pots were kind of looked down upon by, the elite New York and California publishers. And yet there were millions of people who were trying to actually cook, who were using them and didn't really know what they were doing. And there wasn't quality product for those people. And so for a publisher to say, you know what, I'm going to take my expertise and all of our skills and try to deliver something of real value to this audience, I think is meaningful. And so certainly, I know this sounds a little bit far afield from your question, Kristin, but I think, hearing somebody say, my 80-year-old grandmother had stopped cooking for herself because she couldn't negotiate the stove anymore. But with these Instant Pot recipes, she's able to keep cooking for herself, which brings her incredible delight. Like, to me, that's really valuable. And that's a reason to do the kinds of books that we do. Sometimes they're recipe driven. Sometimes they open windows onto the rest of the world or tell us things about ourselves, give ourselves new skills. There's a quote from the guy who wrote this book, The Physiology of Taste. He's the one who said, basically, you are what you eat. Yeah. The quote from him that I like best, though, is something like, humanity delights more in the discovery of a new recipe than in the naming of a new star. And the idea of being able to bring people something that they gather around, that becomes a part of their memories, that makes them happy, is so incredible. So we started Voracious to do that in a way. We also publish all kinds of visual books that are not cookbooks, but I think for our purposes, we should probably stick to food. We want to do books that are really broadly appealing, that people have real hunger for. That's really where the name Voracious comes from. It's not just us and our omnivorous appetites for interesting subjects, but we really want to give people something that they're excited about, that they have an existing passion for. And we do it across the whole range of subjects in food.
Raquel, tell us when you came to Voracious. Like, how is Voracious evolving now in your role as editorial director?
Yeah, I joined Mike at Voracious about a year ago. I was at Clarkson Potter before. Just as Clarkson Potter is kind of this legacy cookbook imprint, Voracious has this really fantastic new energy about it. And I think what Mike is doing at the company is so exciting. To be a part of an imprint that's just beginning and growing is also really exciting. You know, there's so many genres and areas of food and cooking that we haven't published into yet. So that's really exciting too. And I think, you know, Mike and I are both really passionate about food, and our team is kind of small but mighty. And just in being there a year to see the way people rally around a book, you know, editor's always kind of the in-house champion for a book, right? Like you're trying to get everyone really excited, from sales to marketing and publicity and everything. But it's just pretty incredible. Like our list is growing every couple of months. We're making new acquisitions. But, you know, we're really trying hard to make sure that every book on our list, I think, has something important to say and is really adding to the conversation in different ways. And I think our books can be a little quirky and fun. And that's really exciting too.
Yeah, it's so great to hear that it's growing. I mean, Clarkson Potter publishes some amazing books, but I know, you know, I don't know if this is true to say, but in my mind, I think of it as a more commercial publisher alongside some serious books. With Voracious, very food serious. Yeah.
Right.
Serious, but we're also doing some like big splashy stuff too. So we're trying to strike a nice balance of having in every season, hopefully one or two titles that are a bit more commercially, you know, kind of super voicey, very author driven, having a couple of books that feel a little bit more a voice that's still very strong and unique, but perhaps has more of a sense of place, or is, you know, someone with a smaller platform that needs some more support. But the message is equally as exciting, and the food, of course, is delicious. I mean, that's always, you know, and that's the problem with Talisman. It's overwhelmingly delicious, like so inspiring on every page. And, you know, that's a good thing. So that's how every book should be.
Right. That is a good, well, and having that many recipes, and we'll get into the recipes. Mike, you make your journey from Simon & Schuster. You join Little Brown in 2019. You start the Voracious imprint. Were you still this whole time trying to get the rights to publish this book in English?
Yeah. I started in 2013. I actually came to Little Brown at the end of 2014, and I did my thing kind of just on the Little Brown imprint until we launched Voracious in 19. But throughout that whole period of time, I was still plugging away, trying to understand the Italian publishing bureaucracy, sidling up to the Italian Trade Commission booth at book fairs. And you know, I sometimes felt like I was getting somewhere, but every turn seemed to turn into a blind alley. I can't tell you how many times I called random phone numbers. Just I would get a new international number and be like, okay, let me try this with my little script that I had put through Google Translate to try to get enough words out before somebody clicked the phone on me. I remember finding a professional Italian to English dictionary somewhere online that I used to try to understand some bankruptcy proceedings from some publisher decades ago, because I just couldn't find who owned the rights to this book. There are really big Italian publishers like Mondadori and so on who, you know, I would occasionally meet with the editorial director when they would be in New York. And I would say, hey, I'm trying to figure out about this Talisman of Happiness. And they go, oh my God, yes, of course. My aunt always cooks her bolognese from that recipe or whatever. And then I'd be like, have you ever heard of Colombo Editore? And they're like, what are you talking about? And I couldn't get anywhere. So many times I thought I would give up, and then I would hear another chef, there would be an article somewhere that would have a quote from Lydia Bastianich making a sidelong mention about Anna. And I'd be like, okay, I got to keep going. And then finally, a few years into it, a British book packager was coming through the United States, and I met with them for the first time. At the end of the conversation, just at one of those moments where I was at my wit's end, she asked, so is there anything that nobody has ever been able to give you before? I was like, well, as a matter of fact, there's this book that has been my white whale for years.
Yeah. What a great question, yeah.
And she said, well, as a matter of fact, our sales director maybe lives in Rome or is from southern Italy or something. Let me take this back to her and see if she can do anything. And lo and behold, some months later, she came back and said, we've made contact. They had obtained the right from the family and the Italian publisher to be able to do a translation and then to sell international co-editions of the book. But that was even several years ago, and it was a rocky road to get all of our contracting done and so on. And then actually hiring multiple translators, having all of the recipe work done, figuring out what is our obligation to the American cook? What is our obligation to Ada's original? How do we keep the spirit of this while also making it sensible to folks in this country? It's been such an incredibly long road.
So the first edition you said had 800 recipes. This edition has 1,680 recipes, which is so many recipes, so many ingredient lists, so much method. And this is also translated. Then you have to think through the lens of an American who's going to be grocery shopping in the States. And just to give listeners an example of like a recipe, I mean, a lot of times there's like 2 or 3 on a page. They're short. They assume sort of a level of knowledge from the cook. Like one of the, I think, quotes is something about like when you're, clean the mushrooms and put them in acidulated water. So it's assuming that the cook would know what acidulated water is. But the nice thing about that is it means like the recipes feel so readable because it's not like over explaining everything. Raquel, so you come on board. What did these recipes look like? What did you have to work with?
I think I've blocked a lot out. At first, I think I was delusional. Like, I was like, well, I'm not really going to have to edit all like 1,000. Like, I was like, well, I'll look at chapters, but like, I'll read them. And then I got the first chapter and I was like, oh my gosh. I got a PDF and I edited it by hand on paper because I couldn't do it on a PDF. It would have been too insane. So 8 different translators worked to get this book into ink because there's so many recipes, right?
Yeah.
So the very basics, right? You want a recipe to not have a completely different style every time you turn the page. So that was like at its most basic, getting ingredients in order and things like that. But just like how ingredients were called for, like sometimes there'd be a passage that wouldn't make sense and I would try to Google translate it and then go back to like the most recent edition of the book in Italian and see what they had. Because sometimes there might be a step that seemed out of place and you're like, wait, am I misunderstanding this? Is it a mistake from translation? Or is this really what Ada intended to say? Because as Mike said, we didn't want to I didn't want to superimpose like, oh, she meant this, obviously, and assume, right? An example of this was with shrimp. And like the way that shrimp were called for, I just didn't understand. Like it wasn't just, in a book today, you might say 1 pound. Maybe it says like how big they are, jumbo shrimp, like peeled and deveined or whatever. And I wish I remember the exact wording of how shrimp were called for, but it was so odd and I couldn't wrap my head around it. And then like I kept asking the same question page after page after page. And then it finally dawned on me, oh, Ada was buying head-on shrimp. It didn't say head-on shrimp, but like, because there was something about the body and like and I was like, oh, Ada was buying head-on shrimp at the time. And oh, now everything makes sense. And then it's like going back through everything, erasing all those notes and saying, okay, we need a global query. This is how we need to address shrimp going forward. Does this make sense? Like just moments like that, just being very delicate. And then Mike and I, would have gut checks with each other. Like, what do you think of this? Is this crazy? Do you think There were like certain things that kept like, we're like, this again.
I know. I think that for me, the thing that I kept wishing for clarity on was when Ada calls for a glass of oil or a glass of water. In my house, we've got glasses of different sizes,
Yeah.
And so there would periodically, I think, Raquel, you were much more like, let's just go with the flow. It's clear, that it's just, an amount that is kind of up to your judgment. It's more than a little, it's less than a lot. It's a glass, like, just deal with it, bro. But meanwhile, then I'm like using ChatGPT to like translate this stuff. I'm like in the Italian Reddit and like seeing what other people have said about this. And ultimately, that was like, you know what? A glass is a glass. We're never going to find out whether it's a small wine glass or a little juice glass. It's definitely not a big pint glass. But the reason why that was used, we came to understand that there was a logic to all of this. When Ada wanted you to use a certain amount of cauliflower, she tells you to use a certain amount of cauliflower. But if she's telling you to use parsley, you're just going to use as much parsley as you want. And if she's telling you to put a glass of something in to make the dough a certain texture, the texture is the important thing. That's the cue. And so in a way, even though as a home cook myself, I kind of avoid recipes, or I take everything as a suggestion unless I'm baking. Here's a book that was instructing us in that way, where you really have to bring your own kind of wits to the experience. And I think I just had to get out of our own style guide, get out of like looking at what a recipe in 2025 looks like, and to go back to, okay, this is late 1920s Italy. What exactly makes sense here? The other thing that I think was funny was just how often they would call for a, quote, nut of butter, which I think was just a translation idiosyncrasy. But Raquel and my desk face each other at the office. We've got a little like cube barrier in between. And then sometimes we would be like simultaneously editing these chapters together, and then just like it pop up like a gopher being like, there's another nut.
You know what, Mike, the manuscript that I owe you very soon, I'm going to have to just sneak that in somewhere as a little Easter egg. Was there anything where you thought, okay, like say canned tomatoes, tell me about like what you had to do with canned tomatoes. I mean, were they, like I think in the States now with Italian cookbooks, it's always like the 28-ounce can of, San Marzano tomatoes. But back then, these are probably people who are still making their own tomato passata or whatever. They're not buying canned tomatoes like we do in the States. Like, were there other things like that you were grappling with?
Or there were the common ingredients like butter, like oil, like tomatoes. And then the more uncommon things like certain varieties of seafood I perhaps maybe had never heard of. And then there's like some crazy like recipes for different kinds of game birds and things. It gets really, really wild. Again, I was trying to think of like what Ada had intended and then cross-referencing against other recipes throughout the book, which would sometimes work and sometimes not, because again, like the joy of cooking, recipes were being added and subtracted all the time, depending on when the edition came out, what was in fashion at the time, what people were into. I had a little bit of like an ongoing cheat sheet for like global changes, like, okay, from this point forward, are we going to always assume like one thing was that butter was always called for in a different way. And then we decided, okay, well, in the 1920s, butter was always left out, like a refrigerator, so,
right.
So making these small kind of global, creating like a style guide almost was really impactful, because then that would like clear the way and be like, okay, well, now I better understand why something is being called for the way it is. Or I remember like in the pasta chapter, sometimes there just wasn't a lot of info. I'm like, okay, you're making a dough. Like, what is it going to feel like? What's it going to look like? Is it going to pound? Like, I'm used to having like a sensory clue for every step, right? So if someone doesn't follow the timing, but you don't have that here, which can be for someone who follows recipes word by word and needs that kind of hand-holding. A book like this, it could be scary or it could be hugely liberating, because you're kind of like, okay, I'm just going to trust myself and lean in, go on this kind of journey with Ada and a recipe and, see what happens. There's all kinds of fun ideas that we had never heard of before. I mean, it's so exciting to like come to a recipe and be like, oh my gosh, like what is this? How does this, like, I have never heard of it. It's so rare and fun. And to think that, maybe this is a recipe that's going to like change everything that's been lost over the years, and someone's going to make it. And now it's going to be just as big as carbonara or cacio e pepe or something.
Is there anything that changed your own cooking for either of you?
Oh, that's interesting.
For me, I was just looking through the book again last night and seeing kind of the roots of a lot of different things. Like, I remember the first time I made a caponata was in high school. I feel very confident I was inspired by watching Mario Batali on the Food Network. And then knowing that he, of course, would have been a scholar of this book and so on, to see Ada's recipe for caponatina. Well, she has a caponata recipe. This is a kind of a Sicilian condiment that is oil-fried eggplant chunks with other vegetables and maybe some chocolate or cocoa in it. And you can spread it like on bread or serve it as a side with meat or fish or something. So seeing kind of the root structure of that recipe that was then, turned into something chefy. Similarly, I was looking at the recipe that Ada gives for aqua cotta, which was literally cooked water soup, kind of a stone soup type recipe that I think has a million variations. The first time I made aqua cotta, I remember I just moved to New York City, was living with my brother, and I'd watched Lydia make it on PBS, and she poached eggs in it and served it with crusty bread and so on. But again, I saw the structure of that recipe in Ada's writing. And that was kind of amazing. Part of it is thinking back to the roots, but some of it is we have all these received ideas of what Italian food is, either that's actually Italian American. For instance, her eggplant parm is not breaded. You fry the eggplant slices directly in oil. She says it's not necessary to salt the eggplant before you fry it to withdraw the moisture. She says you should use eggplants from Naples, though, because they're the best. And it seems like a much lighter, fresher kind of thing. And that's the way that I've gravitated to making eggplant parm. I think probably from a Jamie Oliver recipe that I had encountered earlier. So many of these ideas have become a part of the way that we think about Italian cooking. And in a way, they feel modern now, but they've been there all along.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's also very satisfying knowing so much, both of you, about Italian food, to actually see the roots of saying, okay, this is where all these ideas were seeded. But also it would be exciting if I were a chef today getting this book and see, okay, what haven't people been doing that I can bring to the table? Mm-hmm. What about this, I don't know, this puree that people kind of forgot about, or these kinds of things that could be really exciting now. I think you're right. So there could be a mix with something that feels fresh and modern, even though it was been there since before the 1920s. Yeah. That would be really exciting.
I mean, if you think of your favorite Italian restaurant, how many dishes are on that menu? If it's a really long menu, maybe it's 40, say. You get the picture of this cuisine from that. You've got the carbonara, the bucatini alla amatriciana. Maybe you have a bistecca fiorentina. You've got broccoli rabe as a side dish, or whatever. But there are 1,640 more recipes than that in this book. Yeah. So, I think one of the first things that I was struck by was something that chimed with my sense of Italian food, which is the love of the anchovy as a quick way to get a lot of umami and salty flavor in something. Something that I was totally befuddled by was how much she leans on the white sauce. It's some of these dishes are just vegetables are drowning in bechamel sauce.
Interesting.
And she's included the entire map, not just the city that people tend to drive in most, Mm-hmm. And so I feel like there is this incredible world out there that, to your point, Kristin, there is just so much more for people to discover.
Yeah. It's funny. I remember in Gabrielle Hamilton's memoir, her talking about her mother-in-law, a common dish would be fried bechamel, essentially. It would be bechamel that you would let congeal to room temp, and then you would bread it and give it a quick fry. I might be getting this slightly wrong, but it's funny that it sounds like that might track the love of bechamel.
Bechamel, anchovies, lots of anchovies, lots of truffles. There are a lot of truffles in this book, which kind of surprised me. I'd love to know more about how common or if they're expensive or inexpensive truffles were.
I guess if you live in a region where there just are truffles, and maybe there wasn't the same kind of global demand for them.
Right,
like,
that's
it
true.
would just be like, hey, go for a walk and grab a truffle.
There they are.
That is really fascinating. And I'm just also thinking, how much time did you have to go through all these hundreds of recipes?
Well, not a ton. Mike said, I think it was just a couple of months because, we worked with the packager on the design of the book. So that took a while. And then, like with every book publication, you have a date where you need to ship out to the printer. And that's like your hard deadline. We kind of got into a rhythm where it was probably in the early spring. There were a few months where really all I was doing was reading Talisman pages and going through recipes and then, going through, so I'd send all my queries and we'd have a conversation and then get back the next round and then going through that and like, okay, wait, this wasn't answered. This wasn't answered. It was very detailed work. And now when I look at Talisman, like one of the biggest compliments, I think, when I used to write cookbooks, and I'm sure you both agree with this, but one of the biggest compliments you can get from someone you're writing a book with is like, oh, did I say that or did you say that? Like when you're so in someone's head and even like the author doesn't know if they said it or you said it. Now when I look at these recipes, it's like I don't see myself in them. It just feels like Ada. And I was like, okay, I think it's good.
You did it well.
It's like it just feels clear. Doesn't feel like we added too much. I was always so concerned, like I didn't want to add too much.
Like kind of like the coddling.
Yeah, or I might think I'm adding an instruction that's really necessary, but then maybe Ada was like, no, we just don't do it that way. Like, why did you? Yeah, I lived with Ada yelling at me in my head.
Oh my God. Well, and I think there's something really nice about reading these recipes because there's a sense of, and I was in conversation with somebody on social media of like, gosh, but sometimes we have to handhold too much when we write recipes. And do we really always have, and it becomes kind of, it's not robot voice in the terms of like an AI, but sometimes you can feel stuck in, you have to say the vessel, and then you have to say what size vessel, and then you have to say over what type of heat, and then you have to say this, and then you have to say that. And if you don't do that, no one's going to know. And that's true for a lot of recipes, but it is also nice that if you already know the basics of cooking, you can read this and just drop the gnocchi in the water and be okay with it. And you're not sort of stressed over every single little like detail, if it's 1 minute or if it's 5 minutes, those kinds of things. So there's a freshness to that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Marcella, she did all right.
Yeah. Hey,
yeah,
She's been to learn. She ended up okay.
I think so. Yeah.
I would think about this sometimes too as we were going back, and it just sometimes I would really want certainty that wasn't available. And then I'd have to remember that actually there are like millions of people in Italy who've been living with this book. I mean, in Italian, but it's the same concepts with the same specificity, just in a different language. Like nobody's freaking out. They've survived. This has been super lasting over there. And I think in some ways it's because it's not over prescribed, it's not over programmed. And I think the love that has come for this is that it is put into one book, teaching you to cook the way that like a nonna would. Yeah. When I think of the recipes, my grandmother who taught me to cook was Ukrainian, but she was also illiterate. She couldn't read in Ukrainian or in English. And so every recipe I got from her was received in this way. It was like, well, take some onions and then you fry them up with some butter. Like how much is right? Well, you just know. Like, look at me. Be guided by your taste, be guided by your own intuition. And so to put that in a book, as Raquel said, for some people, it may feel challenging, but it's actually so freeing. It's hard to screw up if all of these recipes in a way have like bumper guards on the lanes. You can't really throw a gutter ball because it doesn't matter if you used 2 1/4 cups instead of 1 3/4 cups.
Right.
Raquel, when you were saying you went back and forth, did you mean with the translators or was it like somebody from the estate?
Yeah, no, we worked really closely with the packager who then would go to the translators and try to get more in-depth information from them. So yeah, whenever there was something that we just couldn't wrap our heads around, we would try to figure it out. And then sometimes, then we would just take it back to see if we could find some kind of resolution that way.
Got it. So like with the shrimp example, that was one where it sounds like it was like you queried it, but maybe it was your own intuition that guided you to, or like, wait a minute.
Yeah, it was kind of like this aha moment, like, oh, okay, I get it. I mean, there's also lots of conversations about sub-recipes, getting into the weeds of it all. But, sometimes there would be, quantities called out within a recipe, or sometimes it would be, below an ingredient list, and just making all these decisions so that the style was consistent throughout the book and that we weren't then changing the recipe by changing the style. That was also something to think about.
Usually you would be working with a Word document where you'd have like track changes. Like you're working on a PDF, right, for all this? That's why you have to do it. Inputting changes just must be so much harder.
Yeah, well, that's why I essentially edited the entire book by hand. And then I scanned in the pages, and then the poor packager.
Oh, they inputted the changes.
Yeah.
And then you had to check to make sure all the changes were like inputted into the...
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, because I couldn't possibly... And you know how PDFs are. Once you start putting in lots of changes, then it'll freeze.
Oh,
and then
yeah.
sometimes we had to split it into 2 PDFs. Like there's some chapters that are just massive, like the meat chapter is, big. But then, but it was so fun to see the end result, and then to make these discoveries, like the rice chapter, all these brilliant ideas for rice that I never, they're so new to me. There's lots of cool stuff to discover.
Any that you tested at home?
Out of the rice chapter? No. It was the spring and I couldn't bear myself to put the oven on. Like a lot of baked rice, not like stovetop rices, but a lot of baked rice dishes that I thought were really, really interesting. There was a pasta dish that I made. It was a raw tomato sauce that I thought that was really interesting because it included quite a bit of butter in it. And I was like, oh, that's odd and interesting. And it was delicious because there was a lot of butter in it. But I've never seen, a raw tomato sauce with almost 8 ounces of butter. It was a lot of butter. It was like a stick or two. Yeah.
Wow. Luxurious.
Very.
On that baked rice thing, the thing that I can't wait till it gets just like a nip in the air to make is it's called risotto with 7 flavors, I think. And it's a risotto that is not made on the stovetop. You're not standing there stirring it. You're baking it. And then you're making this cheesy, I think it might be like a ham and pea sauce. I might be confusing that, but I guess the 7 flavors come from these 7 different things. There's a meat broth, there's Parmigiana, there's, I believe, the prosciutto crudo, and a bunch of other stuff. So you bake this risotto until the rice is cooked, and then you sauce it on top, and then serve it. I just had never seen something called a risotto that had that type of technique. Even the idea of saucing a risotto, I've always put the flavoring inside and then served it kind of just in a mound on the plate. I don't know. There's so many things like that.
I love that idea. Yeah.
Once you read sometimes the idea just comes across in the name of the recipe where you're like, oh, I didn't really ever think about, putting leeks with pasta or whatever. But then sometimes you read the method and you go, this is crazy, but also really cool.
I love that because from the 90s onwards, we've had a lot of great Italian-American cookbooks, chefs come out with their interpretation, and a lot of them have so many rules. Like you cannot have onions and garlic together. You cannot have black pepper and red chili flake together. Like these are just rules. And now I'm really curious to go deeper into this book and think
cheese and
did
seafood?
she believe in these rules? Yeah, cheese and seafood. Or maybe they were just making it up because it's fun to say you have a rule and then people just follow it,
All of these things that I was told, oh, this is not traditional Italian at all. Like pasta with meatballs. Guess what? She's got like a macaroni and meatball dish. And amazing. I grew up making fettuccine Alfredo, quote unquote, with like lots of cream and butter and stuff. Not at all the way from the restaurant Alfredo in Rome. And so when I saw this dish for fettuccine alla crema, we put more garlic in it when I was growing up. But that dish is basically the way that I approximated Alfredo sauce. And it's been in this book. It's like, it's in the Bible, It's like one of the commandments. I can live my life this way. Step off.
Oh, that's great.
In the pasta recipes, does she bring in the pasta water?
I think so. There isn't this obsession with calling it like liquid gold or whatever that we have now, but she's definitely doing the marriage of like the pasta with the sauce.
Okay. Because Kate and I were wondering that it's just become such a truth when making pasta to bring in some of the pasta water, but maybe only something we've heard in the last 10, 15 years. And so we're like, is that something that people have long done in Italy and it finally just made its way to the United States? Or is it more
one of those fake rules?
Or a fake rule.
The pasta chapter actually, I think it was the chapter I was most excited to get into because I was like, oh, the pasta chapter, here we go. Like, I'm ready to have my mind blown. And then it was just really nice pasta recipes. And I didn't have any aha moments in the pasta chapter itself. It was really in the discovery and within other chapters that I think it was finding things that I didn't, like these origin stories. Like there's a sandwich that sounds an awfully lot like a Monte Cristo. And I was like, oh, is this it? Like, is this where it all came from? Like,
oh, absolutely.
I don't know the history of the sandwich, but maybe, I don't know. There's this like crepe situation. It's, the crepe cakes, but it's like a savory version that's layered with prosciutto. And it's like, there's things that are just, and then there's wacky recipes too, like lots of recipes that call for gelatin stocks, the super jiggly, cartilagey, made with bones and stuff. And like jellos and things that call for like the meat stuff in like a fruity I was like, that's wacky. But the pasta recipes I found that they were pretty straightforward. I was excited to look up the cacio e pepe because I'm like, oh, that's going to be, because I've seen so many versions. Like there's the Via Carota version, there's this version that, I was like, oh, okay, it's pretty straightforward. It doesn't seem like that insane.
Well, I actually just looked up the cacio e pepe recipe to see what it says about the pasta water. Can I just read this?
Please,
short.
Please.
Yeah.
So this is the entirety of the recipe. Calls for 1 pound and 5 ounces of spaghetti, which I'm sure is like a round number of grams, but we converted it. Olive oil, a cup of grated pecorino, salt and pepper. Cook the spaghetti in plenty of boiling salted water, to which you've added a spoonful of oil.
Oil to the water, right?
Oil to the water.
Yeah.
As soon as it is cooked, drain but not completely. Leave a little water to melt the grated pecorino as you add it and prevent it clogging up the pasta. Toss with plenty of ground pepper and serve very hot. That's how you make cacio e pepe.
Amazing.
So she's leaving the pasta water in, but not obsessed with it. How much pepper? She's not toasting it, Is kind of wild.
It's almost like soothing, right?
So soothing. Yeah. And she's not dirtying up like a lot of pots and pans.
I think that's another one of the things that makes this feel so modern, even though it's relatively, ancient, maybe overstating it, but it's old. There's an obsession, I think, with economy, even in like the long recipes. You're not assuming that you've got all of these pots in your kitchen. Maybe you only have a couple of pots. In the introduction, we talk about stove temperatures. Like when Ada was writing, there was like 2 temperatures for your stovetop, like on or off, It's not like, reduce this over medium to medium low. And then there's an economy with the ingredients too. There's so much about using the whole vegetable or the unlikely parts of an animal or fish. And all of those things do feel so contemporary to me, thinking about how much time somebody has in the kitchen, how much washing up they have to do, how to, make a meal out of something, basically making a meal out of nothing, or the offcuts and so on. All of those things feel very modern, yet they've been there all along. It's pretty cool.
You go through all these recipes. Raquel does this heroic job, like kind of, inputting these changes between the both of you. You kind of like get this thing so it's going to be printed. Tell us a little bit about the front matter, like the forewords, and how you wanted to sort of frame this for the American audience.
I had heard that Lydia Bastianich was a big Ada fan. And I had also heard, I think it was through Mike, he had mentioned that Katie Parlow is also a big fan. And it's a little unusual to have 2 forwards, but I think they both come from such different perspectives. Lydia being, of course, just this iconic figure for so many cooks, someone who has introduced us to having so much comfort in the kitchen when we're cooking Italian foods and cuisine. And then Katie, who is an American living in Rome, who just has fallen in love with the cuisine, but has done a lot of like culinary kind of anthropological work on Italian food and kind of digging into the root source and kind of getting into the history of different dishes. So they each kind of came at it from different perspectives, which I thought was really interesting. Katie, a big fan of Ada's, she also collects the Preziosas, those magazines that Ada was an editor. So she has some like original copies. So sometimes, I would go to Katie and ask her opinion, like, do you think, does this sound right? Does this, So, I think they each just brought a different perspective to it. We wanted, because we didn't have so much in Ada's words and we didn't have so much backstory about Ada, we were really depending on other people's love of her to help bring her alive to an American home cook, to kind of give the book kind of a bigger life and add some perspective to why this is so important and why it's a different kind of cookbook, but why you should have this in your collection.
Yeah. It makes me wonder about other books like this that might exist in other cuisines that we haven't discovered yet.
Totally.
I do think that these things they abound all over the place. I don't know, it tells you so much about a culture and people and the story of food. There may not be as many books that have this like kind of crazy pedigree.
Right.
This really feels like such a special jewel that hasn't been found. But I would not put it past the rest of the world to have been hiding a few more tricks up its sleeve.
Yeah.
I love that.
I'd love to hear, just before we wrap up, are there types of books that you're looking for that you would love to see come across your desk?
I think what it comes down to is always books that have recipes that get me excited to go into the kitchen. I've been in the food media world for so many decades at this point, and I still get super excited when I look at a recipe list and it's like, wow, that looks really cool. Or I read a recipe and it's like, oh, that sounds delicious. And, so recipes that get me excited to cook and a point of view that feels fun and inspiring and encouraging that I can learn from. And that doesn't mean it's someone who's been cooking for 30 years. It could be someone who's been cooking for just a couple of years, but is bringing new ideas to the table. Mike, what do you look for?
Oh, gosh. Well, I'll just be ambitious here and say my dream is to publish generation-defining cookbooks. I don't know that I've done it yet. I think we've come close with a couple of things that we've done, but the book that helps a whole new set of people in this country and around the world get into the kitchen. Cooking is this thing that you can do for yourself that makes all of your life better. I mean, it's connected to everything, as we were saying before, but there's art to it, there's science to it, there's storytelling, there's pleasure. I mean, so much pleasure. And I really think that I'm in this because I'm an eater, first and foremost. But the ability to give yourself the thing that you want is just such a magical proposition that it kind of feels crazy sometimes when I think about my friends who are like, oh God, like, I could never do this. I'm like, literally, this took 30 minutes and you could do this anytime if you would just do it. So the books that can spread that capability to deliver understanding and pleasure to people on the widest possible scale is what I'm excited about. And sometimes they're unexpected books, but other times they're really obvious. Just to bring it back to Talisman, I feel like this has kind of like all of the best of all the words that we're talking about. There's so much voice. There's something really comprehensiveness. There's a story. There's a cultural point of view. But at the end of the day, these are recipes that have survived the test of time because they made people happy. If we can bring that to people in this country, then, job well done to us.
Yeah. And it goes back to that title, that fantastic title.
Totally. I love the title.
Talisman.
So whimsical.
So whimsical. I love it. Well, congratulations, both of you, for all the work you put in to bring this book to an English reading audience. It's quite a feat.
I can't wait to hear what you think. Report back.
I will. I will.
Thank you so much for having us on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more about each episode, subscribe to our newsletter at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Here are some ways to support the show. Go to everythingcookbooks.com and check out our totes, t-shirts, sweatshirts, and other merch, or buy us a round of coffee, and you can even leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen. Thank you to our editor, Abby Cirquitella, and until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.